In the book of Lamentations, one of the prophets of Israel describes in such vivid and painful imagery the experience that the people of Israel had when they came under exile at the hands of Babylon. In the first few chapters of this book, we read of violence and destruction, bloodshed and sorrow and loss gripping the city and its inhabitants. And in the middle of Lamentations chapter 3, just as the prophet is in the midst of pouring out his lament, his heartache, and expressing his sorrow and affliction, he seems to suddenly turn and to say the following: "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." Now, I'm willing to bet that of all the verses in Lamentations, these are probably the best known. In fact, maybe you've even heard these verses or some variation of them before, but you weren't even aware that this is where they come from in the scriptures. Today, I want to spend some time thinking in particular about the phrase that God's mercies are new every morning. I think that one of the passages in the Old Testament that actually illustrates this dynamic and can help us apply it to our lives today is the story of the people of Israel in the wilderness. Think back with me to the book of Exodus, where God has just liberated his people from slavery in Egypt. He's brought them through the Red Sea. He saved them from Pharaoh's pursuing army, and he's brought them into the wilderness and made a covenant with them. And yet it's not long before the people begin to feel anxious, begin to worry, to complain, and to grumble, and to say, where are we going to find food in the midst of the wilderness? And it's in response to their worry and to their grumbling that God provides both graciously and supernaturally by sending manna from heaven to meet the needs of his people. And yet I think it's very interesting and very important that when God chooses to provide for his people's needs in this way, that he instructs Moses to tell the people that they are to collect manna every day sufficient to their needs for that day. And he specifically says that they are not to try to collect enough manna to not only feed them for, say, Monday, but to also take care of their needs on Tuesday and Wednesday. In fact, if they try to do so, they're told that all of the extra manna that they try to store up and stockpile for future days will begin to rot and stink and even grow worms by the end of the day. In other words, God is inviting his people into a posture of trust, one where they look to his character. They believe that he is a God of steadfast love, one who is both willing and able to provide for their needs, and one who they then depend on day to day. Now, I want to suggest to you that although we are not waking up each morning and waiting for manna to fall from heaven so that we have food for the day, that really what was described and what was experienced by the people of Israel in the book of Exodus was simply a particular expression of a universal principle and truth that the prophet in Lamentations describes, and that is that God's mercies are new every morning. Another way that we can describe this, or at least an implication of that phrase, is the following: God does not give you tomorrow's mercies today. God does not give you tomorrow's mercies today. Rather, he gives today's mercies today. You know, so often we can begin a new week. Let's say it's a Monday morning, and we're not just thinking about the things that we have to accomplish today, whether at work or at home or in our daily lives or relationships. We're already beginning to think about Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, and in some cases, we're thinking about weeks or months, years, even decades in advance of today. Now, of course, there's a dimension to this that is very normal, and in some cases, it can actually be very helpful and even necessary. We, of course, live busy lives, and there are things to plan from day to day, week to week, even year to year. But there's a difference between planning and then giving way to fear, to worry, to anxiety. God does not give you tomorrow's mercies today. That means that if on Monday morning you are already worried about Friday, the reason I would suggest that you're worried is because you are not yet experiencing Friday's mercies. You're trying to think through Friday's challenges, trials, problems, responsibilities, and yet you don't have Friday's mercies to sustain you through those. You rather have Monday's mercies. And Monday's mercies, listen, they are sufficient. They are sufficient for today's challenges, for Monday's troubles, for Monday's needs and responsibilities. But if on Monday we're already trying to figure out Friday, we are doing so in absence of the grace and the mercy that God promises to provide us on Friday morning. In other words, just like the people of Israel, who were welcomed into a posture and a relationship of dependence and trust, so also God is inviting us to trust Him. Now, I will be the first to admit that trusting God is often an uncomfortable experience. It would be far easier, I think, for many of us if the text told us that His mercy was new maybe every week or perhaps every month, so that we could bank that on the first of the month, not only were we given mercy and grace to see us through the first day of the month, but we also knew and could even see that already we have the resources for the second and the third and the fourth week to come. But the reality is, if God worked that way, and if that really was our experience, then we wouldn't really be trusting Him, would we? We'd rather be looking at the stockpile of resources, of energy, of money, of other resources that we might need, and we'd be trusting that we have those things instead of trusting that God already does and that He is willing to supply them to us day by day. And yet this is really the heart of God's desire for His people. He's not interested in a transactional relationship where we treat Him like the one who gives us a paycheck or somehow supplies our needs and then we go and live our own life based on what He's provided. Rather, He is welcoming us into a moment-by-moment, day-by-day relationship where we trust that His mercies are sufficient for today's needs and that tomorrow we will receive new mercies that will be sufficient for tomorrow's troubles and needs. It's no wonder that Jesus, in His Sermon on the Mount, said to His disciples in Matthew chapter 6, "Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." And we might add, in light of what the prophet tells us in Lamentations 3, that sufficient for today's troubles are today's mercies.